Welcome grade 7 students. Please go to www.cathomeschool.com. Then please click for the curriculum and then enter the password. Alright. After that, click for English because we're going to continue our lesson, English. Okay. So, our last topic is about combining sentences. So today, I'm going to show you some videos about the types of combining sentences like simple, complex, and compound. Okay, so here are some videos. So first, I'm gonna show you about the simple and compound sentences. We're going before we start, we're going to discuss today two parts about the continuation of combining sentences and the introduction of archetype. Okay, so are you ready? Okay, let's start.
Hello, grammarians. Hello, Paige.
Hi, David.
I say hello to you, and I say hello to the grammarians.
That was an interesting thing to say.
Yeah, it's because there's a compound sentence.
I see.
So there's this distinction made in grammar between simple and compound sentences. And today, Paige, you and I are going to cover those differences.
Let's do it.
So, a simple sentence is really just what it says on the tin. A simple sentence consists of one subject and one predicate, and that's it.
Right.
So in the sentence, I bought my friends some candy. All right, we got our one subject, I, and we have our one predicate, bought my friends some candy.
Mm-hmm.
Now all of this together is what we'd call an independent clause. I don't want to hit that too hard right now, but when you have this set of subject and a predicate together, and it can be a sentence, that's called an independent clause. I'm not even going to write that down.
Yeah.
But a compound sentence is basically two or more simple sentences joined together.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be two subjects plus two predicates. Or more. 2, 3, a bajillion.
Sure.
That would be a very long sentence to read,
Yeah.
but you could do it. It would be a very, very compound sentence.
Yeah.
So, I visited the beach, and I got a really bad sunburn.
Mm-hmm.
When we're looking at this is really two sentences together, joined by the comma and this and. Right, so we have our subject, I visited the beach, I got a really bad sunburn, and we have our two predicates. I visited the beach, got a really bad sunburn.
So the subject in both these cases is I, right? But it's sort of separate. It's like I am doing two different actions.
Correct.
Right. What's important is, like, even if it's the same subject, if it's I both times, well, I don't know how to say this, but just like, if it were like I visited the beach and got a really bad sunburn,
Then it would be a simple sentence.
then it's simple.
So Paige, I'm looking at this and I see I twice. What if I wanted to condense this sentence further?
Okay.
What does that give us? Is this a simple sentence or a compound sentence? Because this looks like what you would call a compound predicate.
Right. Since there's only one subject in this sentence, there's only I, and it's only said once, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't have I visited the beach and I got a really bad sunburn. That whole thing, visited the beach and got a really bad sunburn, you're right, it is a compound predicate.
But what you're saying is I couldn't divide this up into two sentences unless I put in another subject.
Right. You can say I visited the beach, but and that can be a sentence on its own. But you can't say, and got a really bad sunburn, as its own sentence.
Okay. So both of these things are simple. So this is even though this is a compound predicate, it's technically one predicate.
Right. It's
And even if I'd written, Paige and I visited the beach and got a really bad sunburn, that would still be a compound subject, but it wouldn't be two sentences squished together. It would be one kind of long sentence.
right. You can have a compound subject or a compound predicate, but that doesn't make it a compound sentence. What makes it a compound sentence is you have two parts that can stand on their own as individual sentences, and they're sort of being put together.
So let me change what I wrote here to just say, instead of two subjects and two predicates, because I think that's confusing in light of this information, let's just say it is two simple sentences.
Right. Or two independent clauses,
Or two...
you know that terminology.
Yeah. And if you don't, never fear, we'll cover it, and you can learn anything. David out.
Page out.
Still completely works as a complex sentence because...
Grammarians, hello Rosie.
Hi, Paige.
So in this video we're going to talk about complex sentences. We've talked in another video about simple and compound sentences, so that is like one independent clause or two independent clauses. And with a complex sentence we're going to introduce something called a dependent clause. So a sentence needs at least one independent clause to function as a sentence, but with complex we're going to add this dependent clause. So Rosie, what's an example of a complex sentence?
When we buy his birthday cake, we have to make sure it's lemon.
So this sentence, when we buy his birthday cake, we have to make sure it's lemon, is made up of two clauses, and I've written them in different colors here. So the second one, the pink one, can stand on its own as a sentence. We could just say, we have to make sure it's lemon.
It functions as an independent clause. It's its own sentence. We have some information that might be missing from this sentence because we don't necessarily know what its is, but we do have all the components of an independent clause here. We've got a subject, we, and a verb, have to, and, well, we have multiple verbs.
Yeah, got a lot of have to make sure.
So the sentence is relying on some information that's not provided, but it does still stand as its own sentence.
Right, like we could have a sentence before it that's like, we're gonna go buy a birthday cake. We have to make sure it's lemon, right? Those can be two separate sentences. In this case, we have this other clause, this what's called a dependent clause. We can't just say, when we buy his birthday cake as a sentence. That doesn't really stand on its own. It doesn't convey the information that a sentence needs to convey. So we could have an independent clause or a sentence that's just, we buy his birthday cake. It's kind of a weird construction. I don't know that I would say that. You could maybe say, we are buying his birthday cake, right? But we buy his birthday cake still works as a sentence. It has a subject, we, and a verb, buy, and it expresses a complete idea. It's an action that's happening, and it tells you who's doing it. But we add this thing called a subordinating conjunction. That's this word when here. And that makes this into a dependent clause. It can't be a sentence by itself, so it depends on the later clause, we have to make sure it's lemon, to be part of a sentence. Okay, so Rosie, what's another example of a complex sentence?
Although our tent was zipped up, the sound of hyenas in the distance still frightened us.
So again, this sentence starts with a dependent clause. Although our tent was zipped up. This would be independent if it said, our tent was zipped up. But again, we have this subordinating conjunction, although, at the beginning. And there's kind of a whole bunch of different subordinating conjunctions. They're sort of just something that you need to remember. but essentially their job is to connect clauses in sentences, but also make things into dependent clauses.
One other thing, we're showing you two sentences where the dependent clause is coming before the independent clause, but that's not necessarily always going to be the case. Like, for example, we could have said, the sound of hyenas in the distance frightened us even though our tent was zipped up.
Right. That would still be a complex sentence. It would be an independent clause and a dependent clause, but just in a different order. They don't have to be in this order that we've done twice. Okay, so Rosie, what if I do something like this? Like, when we buy his birthday cake, we have to make sure it's lemon because it's his favorite. I think because it's his favorite is a dependent clause, right?
That's right. And this sentence still completely works as a complex sentence because you still just have this one independent clause. We have to make sure it's lemon. But the thing about complex sentences is you can add more than one dependent clause if you want, and it's still considered a complex sentence.
Okay, so it has to have just one independent clause.
Right.
But I guess as many dependent clauses as you want.
Yeah, you can go crazy.
Okay, cool. So I think that's complex sentences. It's an independent clause that can be a sentence by itself, and one or more dependent clauses, which can't be sentences by themselves, all put together in one big sentence. Does that sound right, Rosie?
Sounds good to me, Paige.
Cool. You can learn anything. Page out.
Rosie out.
Okay, so I also have a video about compound complex sentences. Here it will explain what is the
And
meaning
clauses.
of compound
Ignore-
and complex sentences.
Hello, Rosie.
Hi, Paige.
Let's
So in this
all
video, we're
watch
going to
this.
talk about compound complex sentences.
So we just covered complex sentences in the last video, which is where you've got a simple sentence or one independent clause, and then that's accompanied by at least one dependent clause. So the compound complex sentence is a little bit different. In this one, you have a compound sentence, which is more than one independent clause, and also at least one dependent clause.
Okay, so it's like there's compound and there's complex, and this is a combination of both of them.
That's right.
Right, okay, so compound complex takes the more than one independent clause from a compound sentence and the dependent clause, or more than one, from a complex sentence and puts them together. So you have at least two independent clauses and at least one dependent clause. I say at least because you can have more than one or more than two of either of those, but it has to be at least that.
Right.
So, Rosie, just to make sure this all makes sense, can we get an example of a compound complex sentence?
After the storm passed, I went outside and I picked flowers.
That's lovely.
Isn't that nice?
Okay, so I went outside and I picked flowers are both independent clauses. Ignoring after the storm passed, if we just had I went outside and I picked flowers, that's a compound sentence. That's two independent clauses. So then we add after the storm passed, which is a dependent clause, and that makes it compound complex. We have at least two independent clauses and at least one dependent clause. So in this case, exactly two and exactly one. Rosie, can you tell me about your friend Alberto in a compound complex sentence, please?
Sure. My friend Alberto, well, you'll see. Though he has a crippling walnut allergy, Alberto bravely walked through the walnut grove, but he made sure to wear long sleeves.
That's a good call.
Yeah, he's smart.
Yeah, smart kid. So again, if we just say Alberto bravely walked through the walnut grove, but he made sure to wear long sleeves, that's a compound sentence. There's two independent clauses. Alberto bravely walked through the walnut grove is one, and then the second one is, but he made sure to wear long sleeves. But then again, we add a dependent clause at the beginning, though he has a crippling walnut allergy. That is what makes it compound complex. It has elements of compound, the two independent clauses, and it has an element of complex, the dependent clause. But Rosie, these are both the minimum number. These sentences both have the minimum number of each independent and dependent clauses. So can we see something maybe that has like more clauses?
Yeah, sure. Well, let's take a look at this first sentence. We have, I think we can add a dependent clause to that. Let's give it a try. After the storm passed, I went outside and I picked flowers because they were beautiful.
Okay, I see. Right, so this is a case where we say we can have more than one dependent clause if we want to. Right? I know I keep saying this, but like 2 independent clauses and 1 dependent clause are the minimum for a compound complex sentence. It can have more, and it still qualifies as compound complex. So that's compound complex sentences. They are like compound in that they have more than 1 independent clause, and they're like complex in that they also have dependent clauses. You can learn anything. Page out.
Rosie out.
Okay, so I have this practice sentence about the simple and compound sentence. So let's all answer this. So choose the simple sentence. So which do you think is the simple sentence? Is the A, the sand dunes squeaked and the vultures squawked, or the sand dunes squeaked and squawked? Which do you think? Is it A or B? Okay, so let's try B. Is it A or B? Okay, let's check our answer. Yes. So the simple sentence is letter B. Okay, are you correct? Alright, next question. Is this a simple or compound sentence? Jamie leapt from the sinking boat, but she left her hat aboard. Jamie leapt from the sinking boat, but she left her hat aboard. Is it simple or is it compound sentence? Alright, is it A or B? Okay, for me, I'll choose B. Oh, what happened? Okay. Alright, it's correct. Okay, last one for our practice question. Are you guys correct? Did you get the correct answer? Alright. So choose the simple sentence. The robot rolled towards Adebowale. Adebowale ran as quickly as he could. A robot was rolling towards him. So is it A or B? For me, I'll choose A. What about you guys? Okay, let's check our answer. Okay, it's letter A. So, alright. On Thursday, I will give you some practices, activities about simple, complex, and compound sentences. So now we proceed to our second topic, which is the archetype. Okay. Are you ready? We are finished in our first part, so now we're going to the second part of our lesson, which is the archetype. So, archetype is in literature. An archetype is a typical character, an action, or situation that seems to represent universal patterns of human nature. So, an archetype, also known as universal symbol, may be a character, a theme, a symbol, or even a setting. Many literary critics are of the opinion that archetypes, which have a common and recurring representation in a particular human culture or entire human race, shape the structure and function of a literary work. Carl Jung, a Swiss psychologist, argued that the root of an archetype is in the collective unconscious of mankind. The phrase collective, okay, can you all see this? The phrase collective unconscious refers to the experience shared by a race or culture, such as such experiences include such things as love, religion, death, birth, life, struggle, and survival. So these experiences exist on the subconscious of every individual and are recreated in literacy work or in the form of arts. So don't worry guys, because I have this video here about what is the meaning of
is ganda, aura lang.
archetype.
With Vita Keratin, araw-arawin ang aura.
Wait a minute. Okay.
Two archetypes. A blank slate, awaiting stimuli.
Oh, wait. Where is it?
What is an archetype? The dictionary definition sucks, so let's take a quick look at some ideas that can help us understand the concept properly. For now, just think of an archetype as a pattern. We'll figure out what kind of pattern in a second. See, reality is complex. Actually, it's crazy complex. Our ways of describing it even now are pretty ineffective. So our ancestors had to understand this crazy, complex existence with a way more limited tool set than we have now. They didn't have science or facts. They mostly had sticks and fire. One of the tools they used to understand their existence was to tell stories. And from these stories, archetypes emerged. Archetypes are ancient patterns, maybe even our earliest patterns. Our ancestors left them for us in stories to help their children, and eventually us, understand this complex reality. The crazy part is, some of them probably didn't even know they were doing it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. All archetypal patterns have two very specific qualities. They exist across different cultures in different eras of human history. Most of these cultures had no communication with one another, but they did share archetypes. How is this possible? Well, let's look at two examples to find out. The first archetype we'll look at is the wise old man archetype. The wise old man exists in many, if not most, hero stories, guiding the hero and helping him to do things that he would be pathetically incapable of doing on his own. Like, for example, stepping outside. The wise old man model exists in Greek, Roman, Russian, German, Indian, Native American, African, and many other cultures, myths, and stories. But many of these cultures had no contact whatsoever. And on top of that, some of them are separated by thousands of years. So how is it possible that the wise old man archetype or pattern got there in the first place? The depth psychologist Carl Jung believed that it was a result of what he called the collective unconscious. He believed that man shared this kind of deep unconscious sort of hive mind that linked us all as human. This might seem quite mystical and fabulous, but actually it makes a lot of sense if you break it down. Let's look at our second example to understand how this might be possible. The second example is the archetype of petrification, specifically, for our purposes, by beasts. Petrification is just a fancy way of saying being turned into stone. When I say beast that turns men to stone, what do you think of first? The Medusa? The basilisk? A cockatrice? Well, there's dozens of mythical beasts that have had this power. Why is it that these magical creatures turn men to stone when they're looked upon? And remember, most of these creatures come from completely different countries and time periods. Well, to understand why this archetype might exist, we need to look at some evolutionary psychology. When you come face to face with a deadly animal, a bear for example, what are your options? You can flee, or you can fight, but your very first instinct is to freeze. You need a second to assess the situation, so you stand perfectly still. So what was the answer for our ancient predecessors when confronting a deadly creature?
Don't move. Can't see us if we don't move.
Don't move. Be a statue. Then they figured out what to do next. So now we see that the concept of deadly animals and stone can be related symbolically.
from an evolutionary point of view, and then we can ask, how did our ancestors communicate this? Well, like I said earlier, through story. It's kind of a lesson for future generations, but it's more than that. It's how our forebears conceptualized their complex existence. See, the collective unconscious isn't so crazy after all. It's actually quite logical. We all share a common ancestry, and with this common ancestry comes an ancient set of primitive patterns of behavior. Ways of conceptualizing the complexity of reality. Through story, through myth, through archetype. Their survival depended on transmitting this and many other archetypes as effectively as possible. This happened over the course of our evolution, which is a long, long period of time. So, what is an archetype? Now we're ready for the proper definition. And a powerful one comes courtesy of University of Toronto professor Dr. Jordan Peterson, who said, most fundamentally, an archetype is a behavioral pattern and the reflection of that behavior in a story. So the next time you're reading a story, look for a pattern and ask yourself, what human behavior is this reflecting? Maybe you'll learn something about yourself and about humanity. I'm Senor Kozak. Thank you very much for watching.
Okay, we will stop here. And for our next video, we'll continue about the meaning or the different kinds of archetype. Okay, thank you for listening. Thank you, grade 7.